give a few minutes for folks to sign on. I don't think everyone's get it. I'm hearing something other than Michaela. I don't know if we wanted to start that way.
Maybe let me just mute some of our friends.
And they can unmute themselves, or?
So they should be able to, but if not, if anyone has trouble unmuting at any time, just send a chat and we can take care of that. No problem.
It's 2 after. Well, I wanted to first of all thank everyone. Welcome to the very first of our virtual regional member meetings this year. As a part of this, just know if any technology issues happen, you can rejoin us using the same link that you received to sign on today. And we will also be sending video requests to you. We want this to be a dialogue and conversation, but also have limitations with the technology. So look for those video requests so that you can introduce yourself via video if you like to. And also, you can add, will allow you to join by video when you ask questions or have other comments as we go. So we want to see as many faces as possible today. Next slide. And I am Jessica Love. I'm Executive Director for Prosperity Indiana. We have a number of our team members on with us. So we have Rita O'Donohue. Rita, wave. I believe that we have Carrie Craig on. Carrie, if you're on by video, please wave. And
hello,
Teresa,
everyone.
Thanks. Teresa, if you are on by video, wave. And Michaela is here, and she is managing all systems go. She's in our control center as we speak, so thanks for your wave there. And then also Andrew Bradley, who is our policy director. And Andrew, I'll hand it off to you.
Hi, everyone. And in addition, sure. On the line, I know we have several of our state senators and representatives who have registered. So the folks that I see, first of all, I see Senator Andy Zay on the line. Senator Zay covers Wabash County and then parts of Grant, Huntington, and Whitley County. So Senator Zay, if you're able to say hello, feel free, and we'll have a chance to talk with you later as well.
Good morning. Happy to be with y'all.
Thank you for joining us. We also had registered Representative Tony Cook. Representative Cook covers all of Tipton County as well as parts of Hamilton, Howard, Grant, Madison, and Delaware County. So Representative Cook, if you're able to, please say hello. And we'll have a chance to talk with Representative Cook again later. We also had a registration request from Senator Dennis Cruz. Senator Cruz covers parts of Allen and DeKalb County. So Senator Cruz, if you're on, if you'd like to say hello, please feel free. And I believe that's all the state senators and representatives that we had. If there's anybody else who joined us, please feel free to let us know in the chat and we'll introduce you later. And we'll have a chance for all of our members to talk with the senators and representatives later as well.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And then also joining us as guests today are a number of foundation around the region. And so we have with us Meg Disler from St. Joseph Community Health Foundation. Meg, if you want to wave. And then Matt Ditzler from Huntington County Community Foundation. Matt. Patty Hayes from AWS Foundation, if you're on. And then Linda Yoder, Community Foundation of Marshall County, also a Prosperity Indiana member. And is there anyone else from a foundation that we've missed, or a legislator? Okay. So, and then also members who we have registrations for, and I'm not seeing all of the boxes at the moment, so we would invite you to join by video if you can. And if you're a member, we'd love for you to, after I call on you, share your name, tell us your position, the organization you're with, and whether you are just getting warmed up or you are totally over Zoom. So I will start with Andrew Applegate, if you are on. Michaela, if you see that folks are not on, you can do us, okay. And then Tiffany Bailey, I'm seeing that you are on. So Tiffany, where are you from? A position, love or hate Zoom, just getting warmed up or ready to get off.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tiffany Bailey with the United Way of Allen County and Vice President of Community Impact here. As far as Zoom goes, I'm kind of leaning in towards the hating it. While it is very convenient, but I like to see my people face to face, and I'm ready to get back to meetings where we all are engaging in the same room again. Yes.
Thank you. And then Cheryl, glad to see that you're on.
Hey, I'm Cheryl Luth. I'm with the Affordable Housing Association of Indiana. My office is in Decatur, and I'm the executive director.
Great, thank you. And then is Heidi McHugh on? Okay. And then Jason Meyer, and if I was probably by first name, there's only one of each of you. So Jason, loving or hating Zoom, and name, where you're from, organization.
Hi everyone, Jason Meyer. I'm president of Passages and Whitley Crossings Neighborhood Corporation in Columbia City, Indiana. Good to see everyone via Zoom. Mixed on Zoom, kind of with Tiffany. It's great in terms of efficiency, but however, I miss meeting everyone in person. So I think looking forward to the day that we can gather in the same room again.
Thank you. And then is Nikki on? Nikki,
yes.
Can you introduce?
So yes, my name is
Tell us who you are. Yeah.
I'm Director of the Fort Wayne Metropolitan Human Relations Commission for the local civil rights in Indiana. And in regards to Zoom, I'm getting used to it, but I'm an in-person interaction, and so it's a little bit different. Getting used to it.
Absolutely. I'm going to circle back to Heidi now that I'm seeing that you're on. I don't think you got to introduce yourself. And we're saying if we love or hate Zoom. Are you leaning in? Are you stepping away? Where are you with that? So where are you from?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Heidi McHugh. I'm with La Casa Inc. in Goshen, Indiana. And, you know, it's kind of a love-hate relationship with Zoom right now. Use it, but get by.
And then Christy, is Christy on?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I am Christy Stanley with Lutheran Social Services. The Zoom, I think I'm kind of with Jason and everyone else. Logistically, it makes it nice not having to run all over town for meetings. But I do, you know, we're a social service agency. I'm a social worker. I'm a social person, and I miss my team. In the community, I miss my team here in the office, so I'm ready to start having some normalcy again and having my people around me. And so yeah, that's where I am with Zoom.
Right. And I am seeing Mark Gould. Mark, will you intro yourself?
Hi, I'm Mark Gould. I'm the Community Development Manager for First Source Bank. I'm based in South Bend, Indiana, and cover northern Indiana. And I'm slowly getting acclimated to the virtual meeting space. We use Teams at work, so a little different than Zoom, but never thought I'd be, if you would ask me a year or so ago about using Zoom or Teams, I would have shied away from that. But anyway, just getting acclimated to it.
And then Danielle Tips, and maybe one of the newest team members from one of our members. So Danielle, if you can intro yourself and love or hate. I think you're muted, maybe.
Sorry, I am Danielle Tips. I'm the new president and CEO of Pathfinder Services in Huntington, Indiana. And I have a love-hate relationship clearly with these virtual meetings.
Oh, it doesn't matter how often you use it, it can still trip you up, I've found. So are there any other members of Prosperity Indiana that I have missed that have joined and want to intro themselves? And I invite those foundation members and legislators. If you have a passion or hate for Zoom as well, you're welcome to speak out now. Hearing no true commitment to Zoom from the rest, we'll keep moving forward. And just to note, so we, obviously introductions. We'll talk through, COVID-19 survey results that we did in May, and then also the policy priority survey results that we are still getting in. It's early in collection, and then want to have discussion with you all as we go. And then, there are action items that we'll present to you before the end. So next slide. So, for those who aren't members of Prosperity, I just want to quickly do a rundown of who we are. We were known as the Indiana Association for Community Economic Development. You saw me take a breath midway through saying that, so you would understand likely why we rebranded on our 30th anniversary in 2016. And we are a cross-sector network focused on community economic development initiatives statewide. And we have members, maybe not in every county, but serving counties all over the state through their service territories. And so next slide. And then the bulk of our membership are other nonprofits, but we have a split in the remaining 1/3 of our membership of private organizations that are largely banks, markets here today, affordable housing developers, units of government, a lot of community development departments, economic developers, and individuals that join us as well. Those nonprofit members really span a breadth of community development and include a lot of human service providers. There's homeless shelters, there's CDC, Community Development Corporation, there's chambers, you name it. If you believe in improving quality of life and if your organization has something to do with that, then you're welcome in our membership. And we also have a number of funders in our network as well, foundations. Next slide. And so our mission, which we updated in 2019, and it has served and guided us well, just in an interesting time around conversations around inclusion and diversity and equity. But we're here to build a better future for our communities by providing advocacy, leveraging resources, engaging our empowered network of members to create inclusive opportunities that really build assets and improve lives across the Hoosier State. Next slide. And our vision is a society where all persons can live and work and with an equitable access to economic and social opportunity. And we establish 5 values: social justice, integrity, impact, collaboration, and empowerment. Next slide. So we're here to pull folks together, have a unified voice for the field and for those you represent. And then also we communicate our work through the REAP framework, next slide, that speaks to the resources, engagement, and advocacy that we mentioned in our mission, and then programs that really align. And when we talk about resources, yes, that pass-through grant making that we do on occasion, but a lot of it is training and consulting technical assistance and data sharing and engagements, pulling our members together. And we have an annual conference each year that has around 300 participants generally when we are in person. And then advocacy, spend a lot of time in the State House, and then normally are able to travel to DC multiple times throughout the year. And then probably the most visible of our programs is the Indiana Assets and Opportunity Network, focused on building assets for low-wealth Hoosiers. And so we'll move on to the next slide and get into the meat of the conversation today, which has to do with a survey that we conducted earlier this year. Next slide. We conducted it in May. There are about 125 organizations that participated, and we just really wanted to know what you were experiencing, and two, what you wanted to tell funders and policymakers regarding the needs that you're experiencing in your community. Next slide. So when we look at the demographics of those who responded, and these are organizational demographics, I really wanted to call attention to the fact that the majority of respondents have budgets in the $1 million to just under $5 million range. So mid-sized organizations are making up the bulk of the responses, and so that's who's speaking into what we're going over today. Of the respondents, more than 75% are nonprofits, and so this is really a collection of data around the nonprofit experience. So at the time of the survey, nearly 50% of our respondents had 2 months or less of cash reserve on hand. And so we wanted to get a sense of that, just knowing, not knowing how long COVID-19 might last, and certainly knowing it looks different now than some of my emails from the early days. I think I thought we'd be out of this a lot sooner than we are. So yeah, nearly 50% have 2 months or less of cash on hand. Of those with budgets that are under $250,000, the majority had less than 1 month or 1 to 3 months of reserve. A few had 4 to 6 months of reserve. Of those with budgets in the $250,000 to $499,000 range, most had 1 to 3 months or 4 to 6 months. So that's getting to a safer spot to withstand the situations. And then for the $500,000 to $999,000 budget range, most had about 4 to 6 months of cash reserves on hand. And then the $1 million to $4.9 million range was really where we saw the bulk of these 10 plus months of reserve, with a good number of having 4 to 6 months as well, and then also some 1 to 3. But we really saw that concentration of the 10 plus months in this range. And then the $5 million to just under 10, which is the least represented budget size that we surveyed, they had really a range of reserve amounts, with more indicating less than 1 month of reserves than you might expect with that size of a budget. And then for that $10 to $24 million range, all but one had 1 to 3 months or 4 to 6 months. And that highest budget size group, that 25 million and up, really had an equal distribution of 1 to 3 months and 10 plus months, plus some 4 to 6 months scattered in. So it really was it was kind of all over the place. What your budget size was did not necessarily directly inform assumptions that you might have had. So budget size didn't necessarily indicate the organization's sustainability threshold. And I think that has, a lot to do probably with grant funding would be an assumption I might make. That a lot of money might flow into an organization, but then a lot flows back out. And without much buffer provided through the funding that's received to really increase an organization's long-term sustainability. And so, it's no surprise you'll see on here, the bar chart, that budgetary implications are being considered by close to 75%, and that staff layoffs and furloughs and reduced programs are part of the considerations for some. And of course, there's no surprise that events and services and supply chains and volunteers have been negatively impacted, and that can then further contribute to additional budgetary strain the longer this goes on. And in fact, in the next slide, we'll stay here, but in the next slide, you'll see that 82% indicated an anticipated decrease in revenue, and this was in May, and that 94% indicated a moderate to high impact on their program, services, or general operations. And this was captured in May, when we had no clue that we wouldn't see the dip in cases that we kind of expected between May and fall, and now we're hearing that there'll be, really no dip. So, so now I want to open it up. I've kind of loaded you down with a lot of behind the scenes on what some of these numbers reflect. But I wanted to open up to conversation about any surprises that I shared, and anyone see things improving more than you might have expected in May, or are things worse than you expected? This is speaking to budgets or what you're seeing with, in your organization or others around you, around what you're doing, what you're experiencing, and budget and reserves and things like that. And if there are reflections on what struck you here, or what you're experiencing that's similar, maybe different from what our survey said, I'd like to hear. Not as easy to talk about as Zoom, I suppose, but did want to be able to hear if folks have any concerns. You have legislators and foundations on the line too that are listening to, and maybe it's not your own organization, but what you're seeing in your community that needs a different response, or if things are working really well, we'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, this is Jason at Passages in Columbia City.
Yeah.
I think Jessica, kind of reflecting on this survey, the top ones really summarize not only our organization, but the organizations I've talked to in our area with the programs, events, disrupted services, budgetary implications, all of those. And really for housing, affordable, accessible housing, I think we're seeing a lot of the rental assistance needs with our property manager and other things to that nature. I think we're seeing that with loss of jobs from that bottom tier there with staff layoffs, furloughs. I mean, that's where we're starting to see the need increase and continue in there. So that's been an impact area that we've been experiencing for sure.
Yeah, that was definitely something that was clear in the data, as well, is that some of the groups that had the higher budget, sizes were the ones who had housing, and they're accustomed to receiving rent, and that's how their budgets are and revenue streams are built. And so those were the ones that, when they were predicting an anticipated decrease in revenue, those are the ones who seem to be feeling that the most, were the ones that were property owners. And so, there's, we've dealt with, not wanting people to be evicted, as a result of this, but then you also have budgets that are dependent on receiving rent. And so, we feel for those who are landlords. Not, we know that we have members that are, private, for-profit organizations that are providing housing, and then in doing tax credit development, and even market rate, and then our nonprofits as well are experiencing that. Other reflections on the data or experiences seen locally?
This is Senator Andy Zay. I may be jumping the gun here a bit, but is there any anecdotal stories, successes, or failures in relationship to CARES Act relief funding, particularly in the form of housing assistance or in any of the other programs that any of you might or might not have?
Great question.
Pretty consistent with response with what we've seen from some of the state reporting. So that's something that I've been advocating for. And I think in regards to housing, I think once the eviction moratorium falls apart, I think that we're going to see that jump exponentially. So hopefully the state is prepared to release that. And as some of you, and particularly in the housing area, if you're offering the services, I would have that application in front of you and maybe even do an anticipatory request at this point, because I know we're going to see a big bump in that area with evictions and a lot of transition there. And I just hope that we're prepared to build that bridge, because that's certainly what the relief funds were intended for. We can't go on forever with extended unemployment benefits and or eviction, I guess, holiday or whatever.
Jessica, this is Heidi McHugh with CASA in Elkhart County, and we have been able to connect I think 18 of our tenants to the emergency COVID crisis fund through IHCDA. We've got a resident services manager who has been coordinating and making some of those calls and assistance to our property managers. So that's good. It doesn't nearly meet the need. We know that we've got additional people who are going to fall through the cracks that we're trying to reach before they do reach those cracks. That is a significant issue. I think with the survey information here, I mean, it very much aligns with what our experience has been. Disrupted services has taken a lot of different forms for us, particularly since May. We've been asked to help administer some of these, the local crisis funds in ways that we have not done in recent years. So helping the city, helping the United Way Community Foundation administer and get those funds to people. The one other thing that I don't really see reflected on here is from a staff side, the technology barriers. We don't still have laptops for everybody. We are working some back in the offices, but as schools are going back into session in the various forms that they are, technology for equipping and making sure that we can continue delivering those services from our homes, and we haven't been set up like that, and so that's an issue.
Thanks for sharing that, and we'll go to the next slide, and there we can talk through some of the stuff as we go too, and it's popping to mind. You know, I think that spoke more on, you know, how when you spoke to like the technology. I think it still may not be captured here, but speaks to what you're having to do. You've had to go virtual, you know, and so that has changed our world. You know, I think one of the things that's important to note regarding how organizations are responding is nonprofits are adapting. You know, we're all having to adapt, but we are seeing these adaptations, you know, happening. And for one, you know, many nonprofits are actually busier than ever. You know, I know that we are, and that doesn't automatically equate to having more funding. In fact, for many, I think it speaks more to the resolve of nonprofits than the resources of nonprofits. And so, you know, I think that also speaks to, this data also speaks to the readiness to return to the office in terms of policies and procedures, you know, but not necessarily embracing a return to the office. While the virtual environment is generally working for us, I know that's the case for us. We have the screening tool and the PPE and the policies, and we've even taken advantage of the Families First Act. So all of the things that are, put into place and guidance that we need to respond. But by and large, we're still paying rent on an empty space. We have phone lines that nobody's there to answer. And so, we already worked remotely a good bit because we travel and we're statewide. But there is an element of the fact that we're not in that same space with each other. We're not doing the work in the same way, even though we've done this adapting and theoretically are ready for the next steps. And so I'm curious, what else have folks done that's not captured here? You talked about technology and needing to acquire more, not necessarily automatically having the resources to buy everybody laptops just because you need them. What else have folks done to respond? This also I think might be a helpful place for funders to share as well, if you're willing, in terms of supporting nonprofits who are carrying on their work in this time. What have you done, or what do you think you will do? So open it up for that conversation as well. And I think for our team, one thing that we saw early on was just an overconsumption of information. You couldn't get your hands on enough of it, and you were spending a lot of your time that way. Not that obviously we still have to stay informed, but I think psychologically and just as we've been in this space longer, that grab for just whatever is out there doesn't feel as panicked anymore. But to me, it still doesn't make it easier to always be at home and not be in the office.
Jessica, this is Christy from Lutheran Social Services. And I think that we found that as well. But then there was so much information, what was accurate, what wasn't accurate, resources available to our clients and those that we serve. We serve 15 counties in Northeast Indiana. And so we had to quickly form our risk management team. So, everything had to be filtered through them. Wasn't in line with CDC, wasn't in line with Indiana Department of Health, because our clients were hearing things on social media, and it kind of was getting a little bit out of control. So we really had to rein it back in and make sure that we were sharing accurate information. We on our website created a COVID page. So these were all researched resources for our families, so that they knew we actually researched them. We made sure they were valid, from where are the food pantries, where can you go for our school systems lunches, to how to talk to your kids about COVID while you're not in school. All of these resources we have on our website. We even created a financial toolkit because we knew the minute that they started doing the moratoriums, this day was going to come, and we've been preparing. And so what does that look like? And so it's really about understanding all of this information. Is it accurate? Is it not accurate? And how do we know? So I think that was a challenge for us in the beginning, just making sure we filtered that and we're providing the most accurate information that we could.
Right. Thank you.
I think to add to that,
yeah,
I wasn't actually here, but I'm going through some of the documents, is that communication then out. That was just something that was really needed, and a lot of time spent, I know, on John's part of, just communicating with the staff to help them, understand the information and what was relevant, and that there was a plan and that, you know, behind the scenes and helping them to have some confidence in, you know, what the organization was planning and doing. And I think also adding into that technology not having, but there, a lot of time just sourcing where materials could be found, you know, so the PPE, but then also the technology, you know, even we have some computers, but not everyone had cameras on those computers, even the basics like finding thermometers to be able to do some of the screening and some of that. So a lot of time just, you know, sourcing some of those materials that were needed.
All right, thank you. Anybody form collaborations that you didn't have before or deepen them? I know we are part of a COVID-19 recovery coalition, and it's mostly other associations across the state. And we're about to, you know, have another resource come out, you know, online for us to share across our various associations, so that when folks come to Prosperity, we can guide you, you know, instead of saying like, oh, you should probably check with so-and-so, we can instantly have the same information that another association would have shared around economic development or philanthropy or the Library Federation. You know, we're finding that we, even though it theoretically is harder to pull people together, might seem harder, we found the need to work with others come really quickly. And so curious if there are any of those collaborations or new things you're seeing in the works. Well, I would encourage folks to, you know, to think outside of your little box. We live in a lot of boxes online these days, you know, I think this time for many of us has shown how much we need the folks that are outside of our organization, outside of our household, even though we are not physically together. You know, rethinking the work to be more efficient and to make things happen. So moving on to the next slide. And then, you know, some of the things that our respondents said that they wanted donors, funders, and government officials to specifically know, you know, was that, you know, there's a higher demand for resources and assistance. Operational costs have increased for many. You spoke about the computers and technology. You know, overall flexibility is needed while adapting to meet the current needs of communities. You know, there are high levels of stress while trying to adjust to services and programs. The essentials like homes and food really are the foundation for our health and our community's health. I think there's been a greater understanding and acceptance of that. And then, you know, extra funding is greatly appreciated and would be efficiently and locally utilized to meet the needs of communities. Next slide. And then some of the things that they said were most important. So, you know, those are capturing some of the needs, some of the most important things. Again, you know, increased availability of funding and revenue streams to provide essential services and programs, flexibility in funding avenues and disbursement. And we've seen that from some of our, you know, funders, and we appreciated that as well, so that we could pivot. And then, you know, easing of timelines and documentation requirements, some lighter, you know, lifts for folks as they're responding, and then, you know, support and understanding, you know, from stakeholders. And then some of the comments, really some reflections that were provided to the survey that respondents wanted us to share with policymakers and philanthropy were, you know, organizations and leaders are resilient, and so you can depend on us to be innovative and continue moving forward in spite of the circumstances. COVID has kicked everyone out of the box and then burned the cardboard. So, it's kind of changed who we know we are and what we're have to do. And we've seen a lot of, entrepreneurship, and I think that's amazing. We've seen it in businesses, we've seen it in nonprofits who still meet mission, but their life looks a little different these days. Things may be delayed, but will come back from this stronger than ever. So that was, that hope and optimism that we will unite and come out of this, and that really we can't do this without the support of policymakers and philanthropy, working as partners with us. So some of those highlights. Love to hear any other thoughts you might want to add to the conversation before we shift really hard to the policy side of things. What else do you want us to know you're experiencing, or that you want to hear from others, other members might be experiencing?
Well, this sure is a quiet bunch today. This is Senator Andy Zay again, and I will just say from a macro level, the state is counting on all of you to be resilient, innovative, and working forward. The programs that we put out and the ideas that we put out from the state level in an attempt to fund the best we can, we're counting on the resources of the folks at the local level. I see Danielle and Jason here from my district, who are doing yeoman's work and working with so many different individuals and programs. And the ability to carry that forth going forward is going to be a tremendous challenge as the budget fluctuates in this upcoming budget year. But to do that and to learn to do that in different ways is what's critical, and what really makes us successful as a state. And so I appreciate the efforts that have been put out thus far. It was great to hear Heidi's comments on technology. That's something I've pushed very hard for in securing some of the CARES Act relief funds. I would like not so much in providing laptops, but more in providing access. Some of our rural areas have a particular problem in rural broadband and that connectivity there. We have the largest school corporation right up the road in Fort Wayne that does not even have e-learning yet. So they're going through a transition with a new superintendent and working into that, which would be an urban setting. But the impact of those CARES dollars in connectivity could be substantial and could be time tested. It wouldn't be something to get us out of our immediate box. It's certainly something where we were exposed with all the students learning from home, the business folks, as well as many of our not-for-profits working from home, but even in telehealth, where we're accessing our medicine, our medication, and our consultation through telehealth. Some of the health systems said that I think it's been over 500%. Their telehealth has exploded through the last many months. And it certainly won't sustain at that level, but the collective comments are that it is here to stay. So it will be a part of our healthcare moving forward, but we have to have the ability to access this. And the ag community has been screaming for it for years because the technology in that industry has demanded it. And I think the combination of what we've experienced through the shutdown and what we're driving towards in the future, that would just be a dramatic investment and impactful. And I think you can call it an investment. But I think the time is now. And, as far as funds, I think it would be the CARES Act relief funds that could provide a great support and a springboard in that. And we have some of our REMC cooperatives now that are making those investments, and some of our rural areas that are beginning that. And, I think combining, that with some federal/state investment would be the springboard to building those bridges for the future. So thank you certainly for all you do, and we'll continue to advocate. And I think a simple, I guess it's not simple, it's very complex, but one thing that I've continually been working on is the connectivity portion at the moment.
Thank you, Senator Zay. Any of the foundations on want to say anything, have any comments to add? Or no pressure, but we invite you to do that.
Hi, it's Meg Disler with the St. Joe Foundation in Fort Wayne. And, I think you talked about flexibility that funders are in coming together. And I can just easily share that most of the funders are meeting pretty regularly to share information on how they can each best advance whatever they were charged with for whatever funds that we each are stewarding, because we have our own legal requirements and scope and some of that we're doing with. And the Indiana Philanthropy Association has been on overboard with a lot of support to help us all pivot to. Keep in mind that our assets are also fluctuating, just like the states. And so there's not a lot of extra money out there. There's probably less money than was there. So the stewardship, while there's this demand for more dollars and be responsive, we're kind of walking a fine line and trying to be good stewards. And so are the boards. I think one of the challenges that we kind of keep looking is that who is showing some real strategic thinking for what is this going to look like in 1 to 2 years. And so we have to take both care of that immediate bleeding need, but what kind of a house are we trying to leave for a year or 2 years out in some of these decisions to work our way out of it? Because when I talk to any health professionals, we have a year from now at least before we have all these populations vaccinated. On a health front, we're seeing tremendous disparity in some of the poorest of the poor are becoming much more affected and ill as a result of this, which is triple. And there's very little discussion of that in a lot of the pieces coming out. Everybody's kind of jumping on quick information. So I think, and I know everybody's working overdrive, and I've always heard that from my colleagues too. But that challenge, how do we think long term? Where do we want to look like on the backside of this is something I think we're equally challenging ourselves to get stronger. These are tough times, but I do think I've seen some great resilience, programming, pivoting. It could be some of our strongest days when we look back at it, if we do it right.
Thank you for sharing. And now I'd like to hand things over to our policy director, Andrew Bradley. For those who are longtime members, you'll know that Andrew is a new face for Prosperity. He joined our team technically at the end of February. I think he came in and did some paperwork, but really he showed up on to work on a Monday morning and went straight to the State House, and he spent most of his life there until COVID-19 was home the very next week. So 2 solid weeks at the State House. Literally the legislative session wrapped up late on I think a Wednesday night, and we began our remote work later on Friday. And so before he recaps from 2020 and what that has looked like, and where it looks like we'll be going in 2021. I'd love for him to provide a little more in-depth introduction about his prior experience and what brought him to Prosperity Indiana, just so you can get to know him a little better. So next slide. So Andrew?
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thanks to everybody who's joined this call. It's really been helpful to me to hear what you're seeing on the ground and your experiences with COVID. And so a little bit more about myself. I've actually worked with some of the folks on this call before in previous experiences. I had worked for half a dozen years as senior policy analyst at the Indiana Institute for Working Families, working on issues that affect low income and middle class, middle income working families, particularly in workforce development and also economic issues. And then most recently, I had worked with a national organization, the National Skills Coalition, again on workforce issues and building state coalitions around those issues before coming back to the Hoosier State just right before COVID hit. And I'll tell you what, I'm really happy to be back home again in Indiana. I'm really glad to be able to be working on this COVID response and thinking about how we shift from response to recovery. And I think that's the theme of what we're going to be talking about next. So Jessica talked with you about the results of our organizational survey, how COVID has been affecting folks and where they think that they could use the most response. And then now we're going to be talking also about our policy survey response, what people think needs to be done at the policy level in order to get from response to recovery. So over the next few minutes, you could go to the next slide. We'll be talking about, very briefly, to give you an idea of what this conversation will do. We're not just having a conversation, we're using the results of this in order to inform our 2021 policy agenda. The results that you will provide through our survey and in the conversation here, we will take back, we'll put it together with all the regional conversations that will be happening, and that's what's going to help us determine what's going to rise to the very top of our agenda for 2021. So I just want to let you know that there's several ways that you can contribute, whether it's you feel like jumping in and being part of the discussion, please do. You can also use the chat function on this webinar. That will help prompt questions or any other points you want to make sure that we bring up today. Also, later on, you'll get my email address, but feel free to reach out individually. Those are all different ways that you can help contribute to this conversation and make sure that your voice and your organization's needs are considered as we're putting together our 2021 agenda. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And first, I want to just review really quickly. This was what were the results of these conversations last year. So it seems like a totally different world. But a year ago, we were having these same conversations, and you told us that you wanted us in 2020 to be working on affordable housing, including renter protections, including addressing the appraisal gap, providing resources in terms of defending key tax credit programs, including the individual development account and the neighborhood assistance program tax credit, including consumer protection, to enact a 36% rate cap on payday loans, and including providing common sense safeguards against predatory rent-to-own contracts. So what ended up happening in the session, a lot of things, things changed. The session happened differently. The top thing that Jessica mentioned when I first came on, it was the last few weeks of session, but really those first few weeks were working on defense on this SB 340 coming from SB 148. This was that eviction bill that would have preempted localities from being able to enact the renter protections that on the left our members said they wanted. And it would have actually increased the ability in certain cases to have evictions. And if you'll recall, that ended up resulting, it passed, but Governor Holcomb vetoed that. I think a lot of that was due to timing. Just as COVID was coming in, it would have been problematic to have that moratorium at the same time as these new eviction powers. So I imagine that there will be discussions of that again. And you'll see in a minute that some of those concerns were reflected in our survey results. Other things that ended up coming to the top last session were SB 395, the Uniform Consumer Credit Code, that made some changes to how consumer credit rules are implemented throughout the state. SB 327, reporting of consumer loans by unlicensed lenders. That was Senator Zay's bill. It passed the House, passed the Senate in flying colors, but it failed in the House. And likewise, on the other side, there was HB 1191 land contracts that passed in the House but failed in the Senate. So again, that's just to give a snapshot of like what we're trying to do now is to get your priorities so that we can go to bat for them in the session next year. So let's move ahead to the next slide. And so very briefly, I want to tell you, before COVID hit, this is kind of what Hoosiers were faced with. This is brand new data. It came out just a couple of weeks ago from the Out of Reach report from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, of which Prosperity Indiana is a member. And we found that while Indiana is 39th highest for the amount of income needed to rent housing, which sounds low, it's actually right about the middle of the pack for the Midwest. Last year, this top line here, the 1632, the state housing wage, that was 1603. So that's increased over the past year, but we haven't seen incomes keep pace with that. and that 1632 is 6th highest amongst the 12 Midwest states, and actually it's a little bit higher than the regional housing wage of 1630. So Hoosiers on average pay a little bit more than the typical Midwesterner. And so as you can see here in these boxes here, that would come down to 73 hours a week needed to be worked by the average Hoosier, who would be making the state minimum wage to make that state housing wage, and to afford a 1-bedroom. To afford a 2-bedroom, it would be 90 hours. And that's so just to show that affordable housing is out of reach. If you go to the link on this page, you'll see the breakdown for every county in the state. You can see what's happening in your county and compare it to this statewide average. But the spoiler alert is that in all 92 counties, that affordable housing was out of reach even before COVID came in. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of assets and opportunities, financial assets and opportunities for Hoosiers, this is another place where you can see challenges that Hoosiers already face. This is Prosperity Now. This is their scorecard for the state. And the places where I want to point you to, look there at that first line, save for emergencies. 62% of Hoosiers had saved up $400 or more for emergencies, but that is nearly 4 in 10 Hoosiers who didn't have that. And then the next line there is liquid asset poverty rate. So over a third of Hoosiers didn't have enough assets that they could get to stay at or above the poverty level for 3 months if they faced a challenge. And what we're hearing is this COVID crisis was that challenge. So especially for lower income Hoosier households who didn't have that saved up, if they've lost even 1 month of income, there goes that $400 cushion that they might have been leaning on. And this is what has informed what has really risen to the top as a real crisis coming out of COVID. Let's move to the next slide. We've really seen our members tell us that housing stability has been a true challenge coming out of COVID. And the data has shown us that there's going to be over 258,000 Hoosiers who will need emergency rental assistance between spring and September. And as we've looked at what the state has been able to provide so far with its rental assistance program, they've received about 24,000 applications. And the city of Indianapolis, I know we're talking Northeast, but that's been about 10 to maybe 15,000 applications before they shut theirs down. That still leaves a gap of over 200,000 households that will likely need that type of assistance. And just as we heard come up in the conversation so far, that's something that our members are hearing. Over on the right, you can see Prosperity Indiana and our partners help crunch data about the most housing cost-burdened places throughout the state. And these are the top census tracts. You can see they're all over the state. Allen County shows up, but they are in really every county. They're in urban counties, suburban counties, rural counties, and in all directions of the state. These are the places where people were spending more than a third of their income just on housing. And combined with the fact that many of them did not have that savings cushion, these are the people who are most at risk of eviction and possible homelessness once that eviction moratorium is lifted. And we'll mention this again later, but I'll put in a plug that on Thursday, Prosperity Indiana is hosting a webinar on how to prepare Hoosiers and service providers for the lifting of that moratorium. But let's move on and let's talk about the results of this survey, see what our members are telling us in terms of what they expect to see. So just to note, this survey is still going on, and part of that is I want to plug, if you haven't had a chance yet to complete that survey, please do. The final results of this will help give us a robust statewide view of what people are saying. The people on this call, you are the very first to see these results outside of the members of our staff and board. So let's go on to the next slide. The next slide, this is just to give you an idea of what our members are telling us in terms of what they value in advocacy. like why they want Prosperity Indiana to be involved in these issues. I'm not going to read these through, but you can get a sense from this slide of what they think is important. Educating partners and stakeholders, working on land contracts and renter-friendly changes. You can see what they're saying about the issues that have risen to the top in response to the COVID crisis. So these are the things that they say that they value in our advocates. Let's keep moving ahead. Okay, so now we're getting into the first results. I apologize, I know that there's a lot going on here. This is the best way that I could communicate these results to you. But so far we've had 34 folks statewide answer our results, answer this policy survey, and we'll continue to get more results. We first wanted to ask, this is in terms of COVID response. What are the things that our members see as being the top needs for us to address in a policy arena? And the first thing that they came in response was expand the reach of state and city emergency rental assistance and advocate for additional federal funding. That was the #1 response, and that was the specific policy ask that they have. The #2, I thought this was interesting. It was more of a open-ended option that we gave them, and that is to advocate for racial equity in state and federal COVID policy response and recovery policy. So ahead of all of the other issues, and you can see there's a pretty good representation across those, our members want us to be advocating for an equitable policy response. And I think we heard this already in some of the discussion, that there are disparities. We've seen that in the data. There are health disparities in terms of who's been affected by the public health emergency, with Black and Latino Hoosiers being more likely to be exposed to the virus itself. We've seen that come through in terms of job loss and income loss, the types of jobs that have been affected both by the shutdown of the state and in terms of the jobs that aren't coming back quickly tend to be in the areas that are low and moderate income folks. And those also turn out to be the places where renters are most likely to be employed. So that's a triple whammy for some subsets of the population of Hoosiers, the folks who are low income renters, especially Black and Latino Hoosiers. Those are the folks that our members are telling us they want to make sure that we're paying attention to. But also, I'm going to turn it over to the attendees here in just a second. But these are the other things that we asked them about. We asked them whether they wanted us to focus on increasing COVID funding for legal assistance and nonprofits. We got a good response from that. Support Senator Young's Neighborhood Housing Investment Act. That's something that he's brought up, and they're a subset of our members that have wanted us to make sure that we are highlighting that as part of the housing stability response, and support consumer protections on federal stimulus payments. This is something that came up with the first round of stimulus payments that came through the CARES Act. There was a question of whether loan holders would have a first cut at that. And we work with partners at the state level to make sure that Hoosiers would be able to focus those stimulus payments on their basic needs first. And we expect that if there's another round of stimulus payments, there's likely to be another discussion about that. So let me pause for a second. I want to get people's reflections, and I especially want to see, is there anything that our members or our guests are seeing as immediate response to COVID issues? And then we'll move on to more specifically state and federal and administrative survey responses. So anything that you're seeing that immediate COVID policy response need that's not reflected here? You can put that in the chat.
This is Senator Zay. What on the second point there, increased COVID funding for legal assistance and non-for-profits, is that along the lines of the civil immunity and some of those areas that the feds are working on? I'm actually working on a state portion of that. I just don't know exactly what that means.
That's a good question, and frankly, that was as specific as we made that question. So this is a good opportunity for folks to talk about that. Part of what we've been hearing is, especially in the housing area, but also in some other areas, that if folks are brought to an eviction court, they may not have representation. We've been hearing that legal assistance organizations are stretched pretty thin in their capacity to be able to help those folks. And then I think that we're also hearing that nonprofits, this is part of the discussion we had before, finding their resources stretched. And I think this question was to try to get at that area. But Senator Zay, I hear you're talking about this from the immunity place. Do you want to tell us a little bit more on what you're working on?
Well, I mean, more broadly, I'm looking at civil immunity and in relationship to the whole COVID experience, whether it's in the business sector, not-for-profit sector, the ability for groups to congregate going forward, where they can, will be held immune from a possible lawsuit. And, it's just that seems to be, to me, and a lot of cancellations of any gatherings right now seems to be the underlying comment. It doesn't make the headline, and it really many times doesn't even make the story, but it's the concern about legal liability there. And I think that just needs to be put in an appropriate place where we can, I think you even mentioned this, Andrew, where we can talk about recovery, where we can talk about coming out and getting together and doing the things that we do in relationship to providing services, either business through not-for-profits or congregating as communities or as schools, and doing the things that we do. But that underlying threat in the premise of where we've dictated, mandated things to this point has created a certain level of accountability that isn't really clear in the legal domain. And I'm trying to work with some of my colleagues to bring some clarity to that. The federal government has touched on it in a few, in part and parcel to a few of the relief measures, and currently in the current one they're working on as well. There's been pushback from one side or the other on getting that implemented. So at this point, it looks like something that we'll be working on and hopefully moving forward at the state level, which of course will not happen until the next session beginning in January.
Thanks for that. And I want to get other feedback, but Michaela, let's go to the next slide. I do want to make sure that I show this. And one more, a little plug here. So far, we've only received 5 responses from the Northeast region, the folks that we have gathered here. So it's a pretty small result here, but you can see this is what people have said so far from this region. And here you can see actually the top response has been supporting consumer protections, followed by increased COVID funding for legal assistance and nonprofits. So we're seeing some of that's reflected, as well as that racial equity piece here. But before we move on, I want to see if there's any reflections on what Senator Zay said or any other outstanding COVID policy urgent immediate response issues you're seeing. Okay, let's keep moving forward, because now I see we're down to about 20 minutes on our whole discussion here. I want to make sure that we have some time at the end to talk as a full group. So in terms of state policy priorities, this is where we were asking people, we can go ahead and move on and say, what were the things that they want us to be working on at the State House next year? And we asked that in a broad way across a couple of categories, but we also then asked them at the end across all of these issue areas, which are the places where you think that that need most urgent action. And you can see here, we're starting to see a little bit of a pattern. Increasing renter protections was the top place that we saw responses, followed by seeking a 36% rate cap for payday loans and opposing predatory products. That's something that year after year, especially this predatory lending area, that our members have felt really strongly about. They wanted us to be at the forefront of. We also had a good showing here about making it easier for local communities to fund land banking efforts. and then also providing momentum for new affordable housing tax credit resources. And I know that some folks in the Northeast region especially have felt strongly about that. So let me pause again at the state level. Any reflections, anything that people want to talk about in any of these particular areas, or help us refine some of those results in discussion here today?
Well, I'm not going to miss the opportunity to defend myself in relationship to subprime lending. The narrow definition and narrow policy that your lobbying team uses is what unfortunately has allowed payday lending to remain a policy in the state of Indiana. 2 years ago, I advocated at great length for an opportunity to take I think it's 45% of our subprime borrowers in the state of Indiana that borrow over $400 million and build a pathway to bankability. And in fact, Pew Research just had an article on this about a month or two ago, which is where they've adapted federal policy trying to advocate for that very same thing. And we really do need to build that bridge from subprime creditors and the payday option to bankability or credit unions. A huge part of that problem is the lack of access to credit, because a lot of the banks and credit unions are pulling out of the neighborhoods where a lot of these people are accessing that, who have the subprime credit. So we do need to work with the folks that are in that industry and trying to create viable options of folks that are high risk and build those opportunities. And I presented that opportunity, presented it to your lobbying team, and gave them an option to end payday lending once and for all in Indiana, and they would not come off of that point. So because of that, we're stuck with the current payday lending structure that we have in Indiana, and there seems to be very little willingness to move on that. And because of that, we will continue to sustain that and wait on the application of the federals. Opportunities to broaden that, where banking and credit unions have access to that market. For them, it is not a very profitable means. I've worked with our local banks and many other banks on this very issue. Every time there is advice or information given from the federal level, the federal regulatory, I ask them if it's an arena they will get into. The underwriting cost of a $300 loan, a $5,000 loan, or a $50,000 loan just makes it, it just is not worth it. It's not worth their investment, because their underwriting costs are so much. But the key is that underwriting cost, because the fact that those loans are underwritten gives the folks the opportunity to build their credit. And what I believe is really to scratch out the word payday, and it's all about installment. It's about giving the folks the opportunity to put them in a position where they can have a lesser payment over a short period of time, 6 months or a year. And that's what I proposed at the time. And I think that is the real resolution. I don't care who you are. If I give you $500 today and say pay it all back with some interest in 2 weeks, nobody has that. So that's where you get into the cycle of reborrowing to pay off the loan that you just got. And that product in and of itself is not a workable product. But to borrow that $500 to get tires on the car, to get to a job, to get the kids to school, to get to the necessities you need to get to, and pay that off over 6 months, puts them in a position where it can be repaid, show a payment history, so the next time if they need a loan for, a small loan for any of those reasons, they can qualify for a better rate at a better place. And in fact, there's a lot of pushback, and it's very easy, and folks love to use the word predatory, but there are very few complaints against those institutions that are providing those loans. They are the retail access point for a lot of these folks. They provide service, and though there are cap rates, that's what's always talked about in the debate, but those are the cap rates. They can also lend well below that. And as people qualify and as they show a history, they actually do get those. So I understand it's a concern. I understand. I know these people. These people are customers of mine. They rent cars from me. They come to my business. They live in our community. They attend the schools that I advocate and I volunteer for. I work very diligently with schools to bring programs like junior achievement into the schools, which hopefully are enhancing financial awareness and financial accountability. But the approach of simply not having credit available and not working with these group of subprime lenders, which is a significant group, and giving them the opportunity to build to bankability is a huge mistake in my estimation, because there's a big gap between what is available in the payday and the subprime access and someone that qualifies for legitimate credit with a $600, $700, $800 or 800-point credit score. And, again, what was offered a couple years ago in my legislation was an interim product there that allowed them to move from a higher interest to a middle interest to what I would call a qualified interest rate over a period of time. And yes, to revolve that payday, which was also a part of the statute that I proposed, in limiting how many times that loan could be taken out over time. But it was honestly your group that fought it tooth and nail all the way to the end and has left payday as a product as it is here in Indiana today.
All right, well, thank you for that. Now I want to make sure we have now 14 minutes left. Anybody else have any input for us on the state priorities? And I want to make sure we touch on federal and administrative and have a little chance for some dialogue at the end. Okay, not hearing anything else, so let's move forward. And actually, it looks like, go ahead and go to the next slide. Unfortunately, it looks like we are missing our federal policy slide. We have a couple, we duplicate our administrative policy priorities. So, let's just cover those very briefly here. So the top one we had for administrative, informing the Indiana Affordable Housing and Community Development Fund priorities, followed by responding to federal consumer protection rules and regulations, and reducing the administrative burdens placed on local service providers. And, I'll say in the conversations that I've had so far about these administrative priorities, I think that in general we're hearing some frustration from our members about, being able to find ways to weigh in on the administrative process. I think they're finding it to be kind of cumbersome to provide comments on state proposals and then feel like that they're not being reflected in the final discussion and the decision making. So especially with COVID, I think that our service providers are wanting to be able to weigh in and participate, but they're feeling like, is it worth the limited time they have to participate in that process if they're not going to be listened to? So let me see if I can find our federal policies to be able to talk about here real quick. But if anybody has something to weigh in on that administrative priority process, I think we'd be glad to hear from you. Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to go ahead and just tell you I pulled up here the results from our federal policy priorities. They're the things that people talked about that they wanted to see the most. The first was ensuring robust federal funding for community development programs. So again, I think that issue of being concerned about having enough resources, especially in light of COVID. The second highest areas we had responses from was funding a program providing temporary financial assistance for renters experiencing economic shocks. So again, that's something that's coming up at the state level and at the federal level. And I think that really undergirds that issue that housing is healthcare, and if people don't have stable housing, then everything else falls apart. And then after that, the third highest was protecting the lowest income households from rent increases or work requirements that do not improve self-sufficiency. So again, I think what we're seeing so far in our responses is people are really wanting to make sure that there's stable housing and that we build from that foundation. So let me finish up here. Let's go ahead forward with our responses, with our slides. We've been through the administrative policy. So here, just want to put in a plug. If you haven't signed up yet, please be sure that you're getting our action alerts and that you're on our email list. We do a lot of our communicating recently through our blog, through releases there. So make sure that you're getting those alerts. And this is a way, if one session comes around again, that we are able to communicate with our members and provide you opportunities to weigh in and contact your members and representatives like you have online today. Then go next to the next slide. Last year, we had a series of policy and pizza meetings, and we'd like to be able to do something like that again. Frankly, I'm not sure what a pizza party would look like in the COVID area, but I think that we want to make sure that we provide this opportunity. We're thinking about the late fall after the elections. Once we know who the members will be in new congressional delegation, especially, that'll be our chance to talk with folks again about, at that point, we'll have our finalized policy agenda and getting ready for 2021. And to the next slide, we have already set a tentative date, at least, for our State House Day for 2021. That would be Tuesday, January the 12th. We're not sure. I don't know if any of our representatives and senators know if it'll be in the State House as usual, if it'll be in the convention center, if we'll be doing this kind of thing online. But we're going to make sure that we find a way to have our members' voices heard no matter what. We want to help facilitate that relationship building. And so, take this moment to thank again Senator Zay, Senator Cruz, Representative Cook, who are on the line. And then the final piece that I have is just a reminder for everybody. Please make sure you fill out that policy survey, and please stay in touch. And so with that, let me turn it over to Rita to talk about some of our other programming offerings coming up.
Hi, welcome. My name's Rita. I'm the Engagement Director for Prosperity. And I just wanted to suggest, if I'm doing some one-on-one meetings with all members right now, for the last 2.5 weeks, I've had 55 meetings. So if you haven't already scheduled one, I know I've had one with Tiffany. Mark, I don't think we've had one yet, but so please give me a call or shoot me an email and get together. It's just an opportunity for us to find out exactly what you need. And I'll be kind of picking your brain on things that you feel we're doing well, things that we could do better. You're not going to hurt our feelings. We really do want to do the best work that we can for you. So just wanted to encourage you on that. Jessica?
Great, and I think we have some of our contact information there, but just wanted to make sure we're circling back. Or there, what else is on folks' minds today as we have these last, few minutes. If you haven't shared and want to do so, we invite that before we sign off for the day. Well, on behalf of our team, really appreciate everyone for being here today. Especially appreciate having guests here to listen to our members, to hear what they're experiencing around COVID-19 and the policy work that we expect to be part of in the coming year. So really appreciate it. Let us know. Please reach out. Rita is serious about those meetings, and she can make them fun. I do hate Zoom. Sign up for a meeting with Rita. So I've heard some interesting stories about wardrobe changes and everything. So she will likely make you guys. Anyway, we won't go so far into all that. But and reach out to me, Andrew, as things arise, and our other team members as well. And have a really great day. Learn a new Zoom platform if you might. So I really appreciate it. Thank you all, and see you later.
Bye. Thank you.